The autumn rain pelted against the tall windows of Buckingham Palace as King Charles III sat in his private study, reviewing the quarterly financial reports that had just arrived from the royal household's accounting department. The flickering flames in the marble fireplace cast dancing shadows across the ornate room, but nothing could warm the chill that was about to settle over the monarchy. Charles adjusted his reading glasses and opened the leather-bound, folder-marked Confidential Financial Review, October 2024. What he expected to be routine numbers and standard expenditures would soon reveal a scandal that would shake the very foundations of the Windsor family. Laura Lopes, his stepdaughter through his marriage to Queen Camilla, had always been considered one of the more private members of the extended royal family. Unlike her stepbrothers William and Harry, Laura had maintained a relatively low profile, working as an art curator and living what appeared to be a modest life in the English countryside with her husband Harry Lopes and their 3 children. The accountant's report began innocuously enough. Routine expenses, standard allocations, regular payments to various family members for their official duties, and personal allowances. But on page 17, a series of irregular transactions caught the king's attention. Large sums of money, transferred from various royal accounts over the past 18 months, all bearing the authorization code that belonged to Laura Lopes. Charles felt his heart rate quicken as he read through the details. £200,000 withdrawn from the Duchy of Cornwall Emergency Fund. Another £150,000 from the Queen's personal charitable foundation. Smaller amounts, but still significant, taken from accounts designated for palace maintenance, royal travel expenses, and even funds meant for the royal collections preservation projects. The total amount was staggering. Over £800,000, systematically moved from royal accounts into what appeared to be Laura's personal banking arrangements. Each transaction had been carefully scheduled, spaced out over months to avoid detection, and disguised under various seemingly legitimate expense categories. The king's hands trembled slightly as he reached for his secure phone to call Sir Michael Stevens, the keeper of the privy purse and the man responsible for the royal family's financial affairs. The gravity of what he was reading began to sink in. This wasn't simply a case of overspending or poor financial management. The pattern of transactions, their timing, and their concealment suggested something far more serious. Deliberate theft from the crown's resources. "Sir Michael, I need you in my study immediately," Charles said when the call connected. "And bring the complete financial files for Laura Lopes for the past 2 years. Everything." While waiting for Sir Michael's arrival, Charles tried to process the implications of what he had discovered. Laura had been part of their family for over 2 decades. She had attended family gatherings, participated in private celebrations, and had been welcomed into the inner circle of the royal household. The idea that she could have been systematically stealing from the very institution that had embraced her seemed almost impossible to believe. But the numbers didn't lie. The transactions were there in black and white, each one bearing Laura's electronic signature and authorization codes that only she could have used. The sophisticated nature of the theft suggested careful planning and intimate knowledge of the royal financial systems, access that Laura had gained through her position as a family member and her involvement in various royal charitable endeavors. Sir Michael arrived within 20 minutes, his usually composed demeanor showing signs of strain. A career civil servant who had managed royal finances for over 15 years, he had never faced a situation quite like this one. He carried with him several thick folders and a laptop computer containing the complete financial records that the king had requested. "Your Majesty," Sir Michael began carefully, "I've been reviewing these accounts since your call, and I'm afraid the situation may be even more complex than what appears in the initial report." Together, they spread the documents across the king's mahogany desk and began piecing together the full scope of Laura's activities. What emerged was a picture of systematic financial manipulation that had been ongoing for nearly 2 years. The theft had begun small, with modest amounts taken from discretionary funds that were rarely audited closely. But as Laura had grown more confident and desperate for larger sums, the amount had increased dramatically. The pattern suggested someone under significant financial pressure. Sir Michael had already begun preliminary inquiries and discovered that Laura and her husband had made several high-risk investments in art and property that had failed spectacularly. Their lifestyle, while appearing modest from the outside, had been subsidized by increasingly expensive tastes in art collection, luxury travel, and private education for their children. "There's more, Your Majesty," Sir Michael continued, his voice heavy with concern. Some of these funds were designated for specific charitable purposes. The money taken from the Queen's Charitable Foundation was meant to support literacy programs in underserved communities. The Duchy of Cornwall funds were earmarked for environmental conservation projects. This isn't just theft from the family, it's theft from causes that serve the public good. Charles felt a wave of anger wash over him, followed immediately by deep sadness. The betrayal was personal, but the implications extended far beyond family dynamics. The monarchy's reputation rested on principles of duty, service, and moral leadership. If news of this theft became public, it would provide ammunition for Republican critics and damage the institution's credibility at a time when public support for the royal family was already being carefully managed. The king stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the London skyline beyond the palace gates. In the distance, he could see tourists gathered outside, many of them taking photographs and hoping for a glimpse of royal life. These people trusted the institution he represented. They believed in the values that the monarchy was supposed to embody. How could he explain that a member of his own family had violated that trust in such a fundamental way? "Sir Michael, I want you to conduct a complete forensic audit of every account that Laura has had access to," Charles ordered. "I want to know the full extent of this situation before we decide how to proceed. And this information must remain absolutely confidential until we determine our course of action." As Sir Michael gathered the documents to begin his comprehensive investigation, Charles was left alone with the weight of his discovery. The next few hours would be crucial in determining not just Laura's fate, but potentially the future of the monarchy itself. The decisions he made in the coming days would need to balance family loyalty with institutional duty, private justice with public responsibility. The rain continued to fall against the palace windows as evening approached, and Charles knew that when the sun rose the next morning, nothing would ever be quite the same for the Windsor family. The discovery of Laura's theft marked the beginning of a crisis that would test every principle and value that the monarchy claimed to represent. In the quiet of his study, surrounded by centuries of royal history and tradition, King Charles began to contemplate the most difficult decision of his reign: how to deal with betrayal from within his own family while preserving the integrity of the crown. The weight of the monarchy rested on his shoulders, and Laura Lopes had just made that burden immeasurably heavier. 3 days had passed since King Charles first discovered the financial irregularities in Laura Lopes' accounts, and the comprehensive audit ordered by Sir Michael Stevens had revealed an even more troubling picture. The basement offices of Buckingham Palace, typically quiet and administrative, had become the center of intense activity as forensic accountants worked around the clock to trace every suspicious transaction. Charles had barely slept during those 3 days. Each new revelation seemed to make the situation worse, and the king found himself grappling with emotions he had never expected to face. The woman he had welcomed as a daughter through his marriage to Camilla had betrayed not just his trust, but the trust of the entire institution he was sworn to protect. The full audit revealed that Laura's theft totaled over £1.5 million, nearly double what the initial reports had suggested. The money had been taken from 17 different royal accounts over a period of 26 months. Most shocking of all, some of the stolen funds had come from accounts designated for veteran support services and children's charities, causes that were particularly close to the king's heart. Sir Michael entered the king's private study that Thursday morning carrying a thick file that contained the complete investigation findings. His face was grave, and Charles could tell that the news was not going to improve. Your Majesty, we've traced the destination of the stolen funds, and I'm afraid the situation is more complex than we initially believed, Sir Michael began, settling into the chair across from the king's desk. The investigation had revealed that Laura and her husband Harry Lopes had been living far beyond their means for several years. Their country estate, purchased 3 years earlier for £2 million, had been bought entirely with borrowed money. They had also invested heavily in what turned out to be fraudulent art investment schemes, losing over £800,000 in fake paintings and sculptures that had been sold to them by sophisticated con artists. But perhaps most damaging of all was the discovery that Laura had not acted alone. Her husband Harry, a former commodity broker, had been the mastermind behind the systematic theft. He had used his financial expertise to identify vulnerable royal accounts and had coached Laura on how to access and transfer the funds without triggering immediate security alerts. They were desperate, Your Majesty, Sir Michael explained. Their debts had mounted to over £3 million, and they were facing bankruptcy and the loss of their home. Mr. Lopes apparently convinced his wife that borrowing from the royal accounts was a temporary solution, that they would be able to pay the money back before anyone noticed. Charles felt a mixture of anger and pity as he absorbed this information. While the theft was inexcusable, he could understand how financial desperation might drive someone to make terrible decisions. But what troubled him most was the calculated nature of the crime. This wasn't a moment of weakness or a single poor choice. It was a sustained campaign of deception that had lasted for more than 2 years. The king's secure phone rang, interrupting his thoughts. It was Queen Camilla calling from her private apartments. Charles had been dreading this conversation, but he knew it was inevitable. Camilla would have to be informed about what her daughter had done, and the news would devastate her. "Charles, I need to speak with you." Camilla's voice was strained. "Laura called me this morning, and she was crying. She said she needed to confess something to the family, but she wouldn't tell me what it was over the phone. Is there something I should know?" The king closed his eyes, feeling the weight of what he was about to reveal to his wife. "Camilla, I need you to come to my study immediately. Sir Michael is here, and there's something we need to discuss as a family." 20 minutes later, Queen Camilla entered the study, her face showing the worry that had been building since her daughter's cryptic phone call. Charles had asked Sir Michael to prepare a simplified version of the financial report that would clearly outline the scope of Laura's theft without overwhelming Camilla with technical details. As Charles carefully explained what had been discovered, he watched his wife's face transform from confusion to disbelief to horror. Camilla had always been protective of her children from her first marriage, and the idea that Laura could have committed such a serious crime against the royal family was almost impossible for her to accept. "This must be a mistake," Camilla said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Laura would never do something like this. She's always been honest, responsible. There has to be an explanation." Sir Michael gently placed the financial documents in front of the Queen, showing her Laura's electronic signatures and authorization codes on dozens of transactions. The evidence was undeniable, but Camilla continued to shake her head in disbelief. "Even if the numbers are accurate, there must be more to this story," Camilla insisted. "Laura and Harry have always been careful with money. They live modestly, they don't spend extravagantly. Why would they need to steal from the family?" Charles shared what the investigation had revealed about the couple's financial situation: the failed investments, the mounting debts, the desperate attempts to maintain their lifestyle while their world collapsed around them. As the full picture emerged, Camilla began to understand how her daughter had been drawn into such a destructive situation. "What happens now?" Camilla asked, her voice heavy with dread. "What do we do with this information?" It was a question that had been weighing on Charles since the theft was first discovered. As king, he had a responsibility to protect the integrity of the monarchy and ensure that public funds were not misused. But as a stepfather and husband, he also had obligations to his family that complicated any simple course of action. The legal implications were clear. Laura and her husband had committed serious crimes that could result in significant prison sentences. The Crown Prosecution Service would normally be expected to pursue such cases aggressively, especially when they involve public funds and high-profile defendants. But the royal family had some discretion in determining whether to press formal charges. "We have several options," Sir Michael explained carefully. "We could handle this privately, requiring Laura to repay the stolen funds and accept her permanent removal from any royal privileges or access. Or we could pursue criminal charges, which would likely result in a public trial and significant media attention." Charles stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the afternoon crowds gathering outside the palace gates. Any decision he made would have far-reaching consequences, not just for Laura and her family, but for the monarchy itself. A private resolution would protect the institution from scandal, but might be seen as special treatment for a royal family member. A public prosecution would demonstrate that no one was above the law, but would expose the monarchy to criticism and potentially damage public confidence in the institution. "There's another factor we need to consider," Charles said, turning back to face his wife and Sir Michael. "Laura's children. They're innocent in all of this, but any public scandal will affect their lives dramatically. They would face ridicule at school, social ostracism, and the permanent stigma of their parents' crimes." Camilla looked up at her husband with tears in her eyes. "Those children are my grandchildren, Charles. Whatever Laura has done, we can't destroy their lives because of their parents' mistakes." The room fell silent as the three of them contemplated the impossible choice they faced. Outside, London continued its daily routine, unaware that one of the most difficult decisions in modern royal history was being debated behind the palace walls. Charles knew that whatever decision he made would define his early reign and potentially affect how the monarchy was perceived for generations to come. The next few hours would require him to balance justice with mercy, public duty with private loyalty, and institutional protection with family compassion. As the afternoon light began to fade, the king prepared to make one of the most consequential decisions of his life. Laura Lopes's fate and possibly the future of the royal family itself hung in the balance. The following morning brought an unseasonably cold October wind that seemed to mirror the chill that had settled over the royal family. King Charles had made his decision about how to proceed, but implementing it would require a face-to-face confrontation that he had been dreading since the theft was first discovered. Laura Lopes arrived at Buckingham Palace at precisely 10 o'clock, having been summoned by a formal but cryptic message from the king's private secretary. She entered through a side entrance to avoid any potential media attention, though she had no idea why such secrecy was necessary. To Laura, this seemed like a routine family meeting, perhaps related to upcoming holiday plans or royal engagements. Charles had chosen to meet Laura in the Blue Drawing Room, a formal but relatively intimate space that had hosted many important family discussions over the decades. The room's elegant decor and historical portraits seemed to emphasize the gravity of the institution that Laura had betrayed, while the comfortable seating arrangement allowed for a conversation that, while formal, could still acknowledge their family relationship. Queen Camilla had asked to be present for the meeting, despite Charles's initial reluctance. She felt that her daughter deserved to have family support during what was clearly going to be a difficult conversation, even though she still didn't fully comprehend the scope of what Laura had done. When Laura entered the room, she immediately sensed that something was seriously wrong. The formal seating arrangement, the presence of Sir Michael Stevens with his briefcase full of documents, and the unusually grave expressions on Charles and Camilla's faces all suggested that this was far more than a routine family gathering. "Laura, please sit down," Charles said, gesturing to an armchair facing the sofa where he and Camilla were seated. "We need to discuss some serious matters with you." Laura's face showed confusion mixed with growing anxiety. "Is everything all right? Has something happened to one of the children?" Charles studied his stepdaughter's face carefully, looking for any sign that she knew why she had been summoned. Laura appeared genuinely confused and concerned, which made what he was about to reveal even more difficult. "Laura, Over the past week, our financial auditors have discovered some irregularities in various royal accounts. Charles began carefully. These irregularities involve unauthorized transfers of substantial sums of money, and unfortunately, these transfers appear to have been made using your access codes and electronic signatures. The color drained from Laura's face as Charles spoke. Her hands began to tremble slightly, and she gripped the arms of her chair as if trying to steady herself. For several long moments, she said nothing, staring at the king with an expression of growing panic. "I don't understand," Laura finally whispered. "What are you saying? What transfers?" Sir Michael opened his briefcase and withdrew a folder containing copies of the most significant transactions. He handed the documents to Laura, who took them with shaking hands and began to scan the pages. As she read, her breathing became more rapid, and tears began to form in her eyes. "Laura," Charles continued, his voice firm but not unkind, "we know about the financial difficulties you and Harry have been facing. We know about the failed investments, the mounting debts, and the pressure you've been under. What we need now is for you to be completely honest with us about what happened." Laura looked up from the documents, tears now streaming down her face. She glanced at her mother, who was watching her with a mixture of love and disappointment, then back at Charles. The weight of her secret, carried for more than 2 years, suddenly seemed unbearable. "We were going to pay it back," she said, her voice barely audible. "Harry said we just needed time to recover from the investment losses. He promised we could replace everything before anyone noticed." Camilla reached out to take her daughter's hand, but Laura pulled away, too ashamed to accept comfort she felt she didn't deserve. The admission of guilt, spoken aloud for the first time, seemed to break something inside her, and she began to sob uncontrollably. "How much did you take, Laura?" Charles asked, though he already knew the answer from the audit. "I don't know exactly," Laura replied between sobs. "Harry handled most of the transfers. He said it was easier if I didn't know all the details. But it was a lot. More than £1,000,000, maybe more." Charles felt his anger rising again, both at Laura for her betrayal and at Harry for manipulating his wife into committing such serious crimes. The idea that Harry had deliberately kept Laura ignorant of the full scope of their theft while using her access to royal accounts was particularly disturbing. "Laura, you need to understand the gravity of what you've done," Charles said, his voice taking on the authority of the monarch rather than the warmth of a stepfather. "You've stolen money that was designated for charitable purposes. Veterans programs, children's services, environmental conservation. These are causes that serve people who depend on royal support. Your actions have directly harmed people who can least afford it." The weight of this revelation seemed to crush Laura even further. She had known that taking money from royal accounts was wrong, but she had convinced herself that it was just borrowing from the family's wealth. The idea that she had stolen from charitable causes and vulnerable people made her crimes feel infinitely worse. "Where's the money now?" Sir Michael asked. "Our investigation shows that large portions were transferred to investment accounts and property purchases. Is any of it recoverable?" Laura wiped her eyes and tried to compose herself enough to answer. "Most of it is gone. The art investments were complete frauds. The paintings and sculptures we bought don't exist. The rest went to pay down debts on the house and cover living expenses. Harry said he could turn it around with some new investment opportunities, but those failed too." Charles exchanged a look with Sir Michael. This was exactly what they had feared, that the stolen money had been lost in failed schemes and poor investments, making recovery virtually impossible. "Laura, what you've done is not just theft. It's a betrayal of the trust that this family and this institution placed in you," Charles continued. "You've had access to royal accounts because we considered you family. We trusted you to use that access responsibly, and you violated that trust in the most fundamental way possible." "I know," Laura replied, her voice breaking. "I know what I've done is unforgivable. Every day for the past 2 years, I've wanted to confess, to tell someone what was happening. But Harry kept saying we were so close to fixing everything. that we just needed a little more time. Camilla finally spoke, her own voice strained with emotion. Laura, how could you not come to us when you were in trouble? We're your family. We would have found a way to help you without resorting to theft. Harry said the family would never understand, Laura replied. He said that asking for help would mean admitting failure and that it would damage our relationship with all of you. He convinced me that fixing it ourselves was the only way to preserve our place in the family. Charles felt a wave of sadness wash over him as he understood how Harry Lopes had manipulated his wife's fears and insecurities to draw her into criminal behavior. Laura's desperate desire to maintain her standing in the royal family had been used against her, leading her to commit the very crimes that would now result in her permanent exile from that family. Laura, I need you to understand that this situation cannot be resolved simply or quietly, Charles said. You've committed serious crimes that have legal consequences. The question now is how to proceed in a way that serves justice while minimizing the damage to everyone involved. Laura looked up at the king with desperate hope in her eyes. What does that mean? What's going to happen to me? To Harry? To our children? Charles leaned forward, his expression grave but compassionate. That depends largely on your cooperation and your commitment to making the situation right to whatever extent is possible. But I need you to understand that your relationship with this family and your access to any royal privileges or responsibilities must end immediately. The finality of this statement hit Laura like a physical blow. Despite everything she had done, she had somehow hoped that her family ties would protect her from the most severe consequences of her actions. The realization that she was about to lose everything, her royal connections, her social standing, possibly her freedom, left her feeling completely devastated. As the meeting continued, Charles outlined the terms of what would amount to Laura's banishment from the royal family. The decisions made in that room would affect not just Laura's future, but the future of the monarchy itself, as the institution grappled with how to maintain its integrity while dealing with betrayal from within its own ranks. The conclusion of King Charles's confrontation with Laura Lopes marked the beginning of the most difficult phase of the crisis. Over the next several hours, decisions would be made that would irrevocably alter the lives of multiple people and potentially change how the British monarchy dealt with internal scandals for generations to come. Laura remained in the blue drawing room for another 2 hours after the initial revelation, working with Sir Michael Stevens and royal legal advisors to understand the full extent of her legal exposure and the limited options available to resolve the situation. Harry Lopes had been summoned to the palace and was currently being questioned in a separate room, though early reports suggested he was being far less cooperative than his wife. Charles had retreated to his private study to consider the information that had emerged from Laura's confession. While her tears and remorse seemed genuine, the scope of the theft and the systematic nature of the deception made it impossible to treat this as a simple family matter that could be resolved privately. The legal advisors had presented 3 potential courses of action, each with significant implications for both the royal family and the individuals involved. The first option was to pursue full criminal prosecution, which would likely result in prison sentences for both Laura and Harry, but would also subject the monarchy to intense media scrutiny and potential damage to its reputation. The second option was to handle the matter entirely within the family, requiring restitution of the stolen funds and complete severance of Laura's ties to the royal household, but avoiding criminal charges. However, this approach risked being seen as preferential treatment and could invite criticism about royal privilege and accountability. The third option, which Charles was leaning toward, involved a hybrid approach that would satisfy the demands of justice while minimizing the broader damage to the institution. Laura and Harry would face criminal charges for their theft, but the royal family would cooperate with prosecutors to ensure that the focus remained on the financial crimes rather than expanding into a broader investigation of royal financial practices. Queen Camilla had been devastated by the full revelation of her daughter's crimes. The woman who had worked so hard to build a positive relationship with the British public and establish her place in the royal family, was now faced with the reality that her own child had committed acts that threatened to undermine everything she had worked to achieve. "Charles, I understand that Laura must face consequences for what she's done," Camilla said as they discussed their options. "But I'm begging you to consider the impact this will have on her children. They're innocent in all of this, and they don't deserve to have their lives destroyed because of their parents' mistakes." The king shared his wife's concern for Laura's 3 children, ages 8, 10, and 12. Any public scandal would inevitably affect their education, social relationships, and future opportunities. The stigma of having parents who had stolen from the royal family would follow them for the rest of their lives. "We can't make our decisions based solely on protecting the children," Charles replied, though his voice showed the strain of the situation. "If we fail to hold Laura and Harry accountable, we send a message that royal family members are above the law. That would damage the monarchy far more than any scandal about their theft." Sir Michael entered the study carrying a new set of documents that would complicate their decision-making even further. His investigation had revealed that the theft was even more extensive than initially believed, and that some of the stolen funds had been used for purposes that made the crimes particularly egregious. "Your Majesty, I'm afraid there's additional information that affects how we must proceed," Sir Michael began, his expression grave. "We've discovered that some of the money Mr. and Mrs. Lopes took was specifically designated for the prince's trust youth programs. They essentially stole money that was meant to help disadvantaged young people start businesses and build better lives for themselves." Charles felt his anger flare again. The Prince's Trust had been one of his most cherished initiatives for decades, representing his commitment to helping young people overcome challenging circumstances. The idea that Laura and Harry had stolen from programs designed to help vulnerable youth made their crimes feel like a personal attack on everything he had worked to achieve. "There's more," Sir Michael continued. "Some of the funds came from accounts that support the Royal Foundation's mental health initiatives. The money they took would have funded counseling services and support programs for military veterans struggling with post-traumatic stress. We're not just talking about theft from the royal family. This is theft from some of the most vulnerable people in our society." This revelation made it impossible for Charles to consider any resolution that didn't include serious legal consequences. While he felt sympathy for Laura's situation and understood how financial desperation had led to poor decisions, the fact that her actions had directly harmed charitable causes made lenient treatment morally unacceptable. The king made his final decision that evening. After consulting with senior royal advisors, legal experts, and government officials, Laura and Harry Lopes would face full criminal prosecution for theft, fraud, and abuse of public trust. The royal family would cooperate completely with law enforcement and prosecutors, making all relevant financial records available and waiving any claims of privilege that might normally protect internal royal communications. However, to minimize the impact on Laura's children and protect them from the worst effects of the scandal, arrangements would be made for them to be cared for by other family members during any legal proceedings. Educational trusts would be established to ensure their schooling and future opportunities wouldn't be compromised by their parents' actions. Laura and Harry were arrested the following morning at their country estate. The charges against them included theft, fraud, conspiracy, and abuse of position for personal gain. The total amount involved in the charges exceeded £2 million when interest and administrative costs were included. The news broke in the media within hours of the arrests, creating a sensation that dominated headlines for weeks. The sight of police officers leading Laura Lopes away from her home in handcuffs became one of the most shocking images of the year, representing a level of accountability within the royal family that few had expected to see. Public reaction was mixed, but generally supportive of King Charles's decision to pursue criminal charges. Many commentators praised the king for demonstrating that royal family members were not above the law, even when it involved painful personal consequences. Others criticized the monarchy for allowing the situation to develop in the first place, arguing that better oversight of royal finances could have prevented the theft. The trial, which took place 8 months later, revealed the full extent of Laura and Harry's financial crimes and the desperate circumstances that had led to their decisions. Both defendants pleaded guilty to avoid a lengthy trial that would have subjected the royal family to even more scrutiny. Laura was sentenced to 3 years in prison, while Harry received a 5-year sentence as the mastermind of the scheme. Both were ordered to pay restitution, though the stolen money was largely unrecoverable due to the failed investments and fraudulent schemes they had fallen victim to. The aftermath of the scandal marked a turning point in how the royal family managed its financial affairs and internal accountability. New oversight procedures were implemented to prevent similar thefts in the future, and the incident became a case study in how modern monarchies must balance family loyalty with institutional integrity. For King Charles, the decision to prosecute his stepdaughter represented one of the most difficult but defining moments of his reign. By choosing institutional justice over family protection, he established a precedent that would influence royal decision-making for years to come and demonstrated that even in the 21st century, the crown would not compromise its principles to protect those who betrayed the public trust. Queen Camilla's relationship with her daughter was permanently altered by the scandal, though she continued to maintain contact and support Laura's children throughout the legal proceedings. The pain of watching her child face imprisonment for crimes against the family that had welcomed them remained one of the most difficult experiences of her life as queen. The Laura Lopes scandal ultimately strengthened the monarchy's credibility by demonstrating its commitment to accountability and justice, even when those principles required painful personal sacrifices. The incident proved that the royal family's commitment to public service extended to holding its own members accountable when they failed to live up to the standards expected of those who serve the crown.